Our speaker today, Chris Renwick, is known to many of you as a fellow member of Victoria Golf Club. Chris was CEO of Hammersley Iron, a company with a long record of successful mining and exporting of iron ore from the Pilbara region of Western Australia. He's also a former national president of the Australia-China Business Council. So please welcome Chris to address us on the iron ore trade in China.
Thank you very much, and it's nice to see so many faces that I know. Have we got this up?
It's switched on.
Press the button.
Right. Well, what I propose to do today is to talk about how the Australian iron ore industry came about, where it is today, and what the future might hold. 50 years ago, iron ore didn't rate as an Australian export, and yet today it's our major export earner. If you look at this graph, 50 years, 1964, 63, 64, agricultural products dominated. There are exports of 2.8 billion. In today's money, that's about 30 billion. If you look 50 years on, the exports have increased tenfold, and natural resources dominate, with iron ore the largest. How did this come about, and what's its future? This is a story of entrepreneurship, national development, and the rise of Asia. The traditional sources of iron ore for steel making in Australia, up to and including the Second World War, were from Middleback Ranges in South Australia: Iron Baron, Iron Knob, Iron Monarch. Some ore had also been mined at Yabby Sound. BHP's works at Kembla, at Newcastle and at Whyalla all came from these sources. In 1937, the Japanese, Nippon Mining to be particular, through the funding of a British company, proposed to mine ore from the Pilbara. But due to concerns that the resource was scarce, the Commonwealth Government in 1938 imposed an export embargo. It was recognised that there were very large tonnages in the Pilbara, which were believed to be not economic because of problems of transportation. However, I speculate that anti-Japanese sentiment was also a major factor. It had been well known since the 1850s that there was iron ore in the Pilbara, but the federal government's export embargo stultified exploration. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the Western Australian Government, under Premier David Brand and Minister Charles Court, were moving quickly down a path of state development. But in the face of the Commonwealth embargo, no real progress in iron ore was possible. Entrepreneurs, such as Lang Hancock, who ran cattle stations in the Pilbara, and Stan Hilditch, were enthusiastic amateur geologists. They are real characters. Some of you may have heard of Lang's famous flight in 1952 in his light plane through the Hammersley Ranges in a storm when he discovered iron ore. Hancock, Hilditch, McCamey and others knew that there was a substantial iron ore province in the Pilbara, and they were trying to attract mining companies so they could cash in. Eventually, after much effort, Hancock did convince Val Duncan, the CEO of RTZ in London, to become interested. A very interesting period of federal-state relations then took place. Western Australia, through Brandon Court, wanted development, wanted action, but Menzies was reticent. BHP supported a retention of the embargo, because the export ban strengthened its monopoly position in Australia and helped shield it from foreign competition. Menzies also had unpleasant memories of being tagged pre-war as Pig Iron Bob. Fortunately, the Department of National Development supported Western Australia, and Spooner, the Minister, swung federal cabinet. In November 1960, the decision was taken to relax, but not remove, the embargo. The partial lifting of the embargo produced a huge flurry of exploration activity in the Pilbara, with all the prospectors staking and registering tenements. It was all secret cloak and dagger stuff. I remember Michael Wright, who was the son of Lang Hancock's partner Peter Wright, telling me that he was a student at University of Western Australia, studying in November 1960 for his final exams, and he got a phone call from Lang Hancock, "Get up here." So up he went to the Pilbara, and he was given a clapped out Land Rover, and he drove around these arid parts in the Pilbara with Lang and his light plane flying above, dropping bags down to him. This is where you put the stake. So he put the stake in the ground, and that's how they staked out their tenements. The Australian subsidiary of RTZ, Consec Rio Tinto Australia, entered into an agreement with Hancock and his partner Peter Wright to explore for ore, and if mineral deposits were found and developed in the tenements that Hancock had pegged, to pay Hanwright 2.5% of the FOB value on any iron ore exported. Shortly thereafter, CRA geologists found Mount Tom Price. However, Minister Court had grand visions of a steel industry in the Pilbara, and he didn't believe that the interested companies had the expertise to create such an industry. So CRA moved quickly to link with Kaiser Steel of the United States, the big West Coast steelmaker, to be able to prove that it had the credentials. One of the Commonwealth's major concerns was foreign ownership, but Court wasn't concerned about foreign ownership. He was focused fully on developing a new industry for Western Australia. The cost of development of Mount Tom Price was going to be massive, over $100 million US then, about 1.5 million in today's money, in a time when the capital markets weren't nearly as well developed as they are today. CRA persuaded the WA government that it could raise the funds and successfully carry out a project. CRA also had an option on the Mount Whaleback deposit, which subsequently formed the basis of BHP's Mount Newman project. But the Western Australian government would not allow CRA to have both deposits. Charles Court wanted multiple developments, but by different companies, operating under state supervision. If you know Charlie Court, he saw himself as pulling the strings. In the early 60s, Japan imported 28 million tonnes of ore a year from all sources. It paid 50% more for ore than the European steel industry paid for their ore. Potential new sources of ore and cheaper ore for a rapidly expanding steel industry was just what the Japanese needed. But their terms were very tough, and they needed to be persuaded that Australia could deliver. They were masterful in playing off all potential bidders against each other. CRA had formed a subsidiary, Hamersley Iron, to handle its iron ore interests, and in September 1964, the CRA Hamersley team was able to persuade the Japanese steel mills to sign a letter of intent to buy 65.5 million tonnes of ore over 16 years, worth £270 million, the largest sale of anything from Australia to that time. To get the deal and to have first mover advantage, CRA agreed to reduce the construction and production schedule from a planned 36 months to 19 months. In other words, it halved the development schedule. If Hamersley failed to deliver the ore on time, it had to pay US $2.50 for every tonne not delivered. The preparedness to take on risk was huge, but the CRA people were determined to succeed, and they did succeed. Overnight, Lang Hancock, Peter Wright became some of the wealthiest Australians. I said that these fellows were characters. Lang Hancock, entrepreneurial flair, brash, enthusiastic, inexhaustible, didn't get on with Charles Court at all. They went to school together, hated each other. In fact, he started his own newspaper, The Independent, so he could criticise the government. Peter Wright, his partner, was an accountant, measured, steady, the brains behind the show. Lang Hancock liked the dollar. I can remember in my early years, the late 60s in Hammersley, we'd get a bill every month from Lang. He used to low-fly the railway line, and he'd count the number of cattle that had been killed by the train. And then he'd send in a bill for the dead cattle every month. I can't remember whether we paid him or not. He certainly sent the letter. I also remember sitting with Russ Madigan, the then managing director of Hammersley, and Lang for a morning, while they divided up the temporary reserves. These were going to be Hammersley's and Mount Bruce's, which was a CRA company, and these were going to be Lang's. And Lang kept on talking all morning about carving up the duck. We're carving up the duck. I had to write the legal agreement that contained these arrangements, and I had about 2 hours of the afternoon to do that, which I did. Then we climbed into a plane that we'd hired, carrying the company seal, which is a bloody great thing and very heavy. We went to Canberra to sign it because there was no stamp duty in Canberra as there was in Victoria. So in the middle of the 60s, an industry was born in short order. There were 3 projects, Goldsworthy, Hammersley and Mount Newman, all in production. A few years later, Road River started. Volume was critical to the reduction of unit costs. New markets in Europe and the USA were sought and obtained. It's amazing to think that we carted iron ore from Australia to the US. We transshipped it at Mobile, at Burnside at the mouth of the Mississippi. It was carted up by barges right up into Ohio and to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. It's amazing to think that you can make that economic. These tonnages, these additional tonnages were really important, not just for volume, but to balance risk. Managing the costs of ocean freight became a key and core activity. In the late 60s, early 70s, the atmosphere in the budding iron ore companies was terrific. In Hammersley, we worked till 10 night after night to get things done, all night on more than one occasion. We arranged finance from various new sectors in world capital markets, did things that hadn't been done by Australian companies before. We formed shipping joint ventures in exotic places like Oslo and Haifa. These activities largely new for Australian companies at that time. There was a terrific sense and an infectious sense of purpose and achievement. 1966 to 2016 is a long time, and the industry's had more than its fair shares of ups and downs. World steel production had been growing at an annual rate of 5.7%. It was predicted that the Japanese steel production would rise to 150 million tonnes a year. It never happened. 115 million was about the maximum. It's about 105 today. The early 70s was a period of international turmoil. The Yom Kippur War had caused tensions between the Arab nations and the USA, leading to a boycott on exports of oil to the US. The price of oil rose from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel. This had a major negative impact on the world economy. The US was forced to devalue the greenback. World steel production slowed to a growth rate of 1.4%. European steel production functioned at 50 to 55% of capacity. The Japanese steel mills functioned at about 65% of capacity. It was tough times. It got tougher. Whitlam revalued the Australian dollar, leading to a 25% rise in the value of the currency. The price for iron ore, which was denominated in US dollars, was worth far less in Australian dollars. Not long later, the Labour Resources Minister, Rex Connor, required government approval of iron ore prices, calling the industry mugs and hillbillies. He wanted to organise the industry to counter the economic power of the Japanese. He also wanted to buy back the farm to reduce foreign ownership. In the late 1960s, Hammersley had signed more contracts for the Japanese steel mills and was expanding output to 37.5 million tonnes a year. In 1972, the Japanese cut back tonnage by 26%. Hammersley had to mothball its new mine and town at Paraburdoo. Quite a few people were retrenched before they even arrived. The Hammersley and Road River pellet plants became uneconomic due to the rise in oil prices and were permanently closed. Things were tough. By the early 80s, the iron ore price had fallen 40% in real terms. The problems were exacerbated by large increases in Brazilian production. Operations in the Pilbara only remained competitive due to technological improvements. To make matters worse, in the 70s and 80s, industrial relations were terrible. The Pilbara was worse than the Hunter Valley. In 5 years from the mid-70s to the early 80s, there were 3,905 strikes in the Pilbara, resulting in 6 million man-hours lost. Australia became an unreliable supplier. On occasions, a large part of the world's bulk shipping fleet was lined up alongside the northwest coast. The cost of demurrage was huge. Each of the sales contracts and shipping contracts contained a force majeure clause. This provided relief for failure to perform obligations if that failure was caused by a force majeure event, which included such things as acts of God, acts of the Queen's enemies, but strikes and lockouts were included. So each time that one of these strikes occurred, as company secretary, as I was at the time, I would send out by telex a notice of force majeure event to all our contract parties, with an update every 2 or 3 days thereafter. After 25 events in 1 year, I became known in Tokyo as Mr. Force Majeure. It took me a long time to get into the name. Towards the end of the 80s, things began to improve. Charles Coaten cleansed Road River of most of its workforce and much of its management. In the early 1990s, Hammersley implemented individual contracts using new state legislation. The strikes stopped. In my time in charge, from 1997 to 2004, there were no industrial stoppages at Hammersley or Road. None. The unions had traditionally used safety as an industrial weapon. And in the way in which we decided we were going to work, which we called, Rio Tinto called, the way we work, we used safety as a key instrument in our new way of working. We made it our mantra. The lowest paid employee could stop the whole production line if he saw an unsafe act. We brought in alcohol tests. When you turned up to work, if you knew what the Pilbara was like in the 60s, it was awash with grog, and not long later probably awash with drugs. But we made, when you turned up to work, you had an alcohol test. Then we had, when you turned up to work, you had a drug and an alcohol test. Then we made them random. This really changed the culture dramatically. And we also provided that head office had to comply with the same regime that the operation had to comply with. So, it was all, the computer would spit out a number. Somebody would knock on the door and say, your number's been spit out. And I don't know why they ever took us to the female toilets, but they did. We have to then have a drug and alcohol test. But it changed the culture of the place dramatically. We've been fortunate that as one iron ore purchasing nation matures, then a new Asian nation has come on the scene. Our proximity to Asia has been a major advantage. I've talked about Japan and the critical role it played in underpinning the start of our industry. The Japanese economic miracle that occurred after World War II saw Japan rise from the ashes to achieve an astonishingly rapid and complete economic recovery. MITI, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, was a key factor in Japan's recovery. It formalised cooperation between government and industry and drove economic growth. In 15 years to 1980, its GDP had grown almost 12 times to be the then second biggest economy in the world. The steel industry, because of its importance to manufacturing and construction, was an industry of special focus. After Japan came the so-called Asian tigers, which South Korea and Taiwan were too. Korea, in one generation, rose from being one of the poorest countries in the world, recovering from war, to be a developed, high-income country. It became known for world-class consumer electronics, shipbuilding and cars. Taiwan followed a similar path, smaller but no less impressive. Then came China, and how fortunate Australia has been to benefit from China's emergence to be now the second biggest economy in the world. Since initiating market reforms in 1978, China's GDP growth has averaged nearly 10% a year, the fastest sustained expansion by a major economy in history. It is now key to the global economy. The Chinese steel industry has been and continues to be central to the construction and export industries. When I first went to China in 1973, crude steel production in China was 17 million tonnes. That was about double what steel production was in Australia. This production was built in Soviet-style steel plants, largely built by the Russians or by Russian design. Huge they were. They had hospitals, they had schools, they had living quarters. It has dramatically changed. In 2014, Chinese steel production plateaued at 823 million tonnes a year, almost half the world's steel production. The net effect for Australia has been a huge increase in ore sales, particularly to Asia. When our demand outstrips supply, the price rockets. All of that looks pretty impressive. You'd want every business to look that good. When I was commercial director of Hammersley in the mid-80s, I struggled to obtain price rises of 2% or 4%. Price reductions were common. The suppliers were screwed for years by the power and the leverage of the buyers. But in the last 10 years, things have been reversed. Prices went up 80 to 90%. Heaven come to the pilbara. It wasn't just the iron ore companies that benefited, the nation benefited. In 2001, the value of iron ore exports to China were 1.2 billion. But 12 years later, it was 75 billion. The industry was turbocharged. Needless to say, a number of new entrants rushed into the fray and supply started to outstrip demand. The pricing structure also changed from annual negotiated contracts to a terminal market where the price was indexed. In Australia today, Rio Tinto Iron Ore is the biggest supplier, second largest in the world after CVRD Vale. Rio Tinto in Australia comprises Hamersley and Robe River, together totalling about 335 million tonnes a year. If you think about it, that's shipping almost 1 million tonnes a day, every day. BHP is not all that far behind, and Fortescue Metals produces about 150 million tonnes a year. Gina Rinehart has her Roy Hill project, ultimately planned to go to 55 million tonnes a year, but the capital costs said to be 10 billion. It's going to be a while before that pays. Total Australian tonnage produced is about 830 million tonnes. This is massive. These are huge engineering and production businesses at the forefront of technology. If you take Rio, for example, there's 1,700 kilometres of rail, more than 200 locos. These are super big locos. 12,000 wagons, each 100 tonnes, 15 different mines, the product of which is blended to achieve a particular chemical and physical specification. It operates 4 independent port terminals. In my time, we'd run the trains driverless in the yards. We weren't brave enough to run them driverless on the main line. Today, drills are autonomous, driverless. Trucks are autonomous. Not all of them, but a good number. Trucks are autonomous. And these are trucks of 300 tonne trucks. Trains are driverless. Ship loading is autonomous. Nobody operates it. If you go to Perth Airport, on the fringes of Perth Airport is a big building, and in it is the Rio Tinto Control Centre, 1,200 kilometres away from the operation. It's a massive thing where they cross this huge building with drilling, mine planning, blasting, trucking, railing, blending, shiploading, all there. I'd suggest if you've got grandchildren, tell them to think about careers in computer science, artificial intelligence, robotics, engineering. They're going to be the jobs of the future. I fear for those who used to be the cleaners up of a plant. Those jobs won't exist in the future. I've got to say that Australia's been fortunate to have large, low-cost ore bodies. These have enabled the industry to ride the ups and downs. Technological innovation and the skilled workforce have been the basis of our success. Being in the right place at the right time for the emerging economic power of Asia has been a fortune. Today it would be impossible to build a port, a mine, 2 towns and a heavy haul railway of some 300 kilometres in 19 months. In fact, you'd be lucky to obtain an environmental approval in that time, let alone build it. If I look to the future, Australia's total seaborne exports, as I said, about 830 million annually. A large majority going to China. So I endeavour to show the Australian iron ore industry is dependent on the future economic growth of Asia, particularly China. Crude steel production in Japan at 105 million tonnes and Korea at about 70 million tonnes looks steady and stable at those levels. But what about China? China's changing. President Xi Jinping is clamping down on corruption, which was rife in the steel industry. A free market won't happen. Communism may be dead, but nationalism's alive and being manifest everywhere. China's not going to collapse in a heap. They'll undergo substantial restructuring. Chinese crude steel production, which I said peaked at 823 million in 2014, and again is roughly half the world steel production. It's likely in the next 5 years to be in the range of 815 to 830 million tonnes a year. Every year, some 15 million people move from the desperately poor hinterland to manufacturing centres in China. This urbanisation, leading to construction and expansion of infrastructure, is hugely important for the underpinning of steel production at those levels. There is unlikely to be further dramatic expansion in new capacity. They won't build any more big integrated plants. Improvement in steel production will be vital. Improvement in steel productivity will be vital for cost and improved performance. This means that higher grade ores will be preferred. The state-owned enterprises in the steel industry are likely to be given preference over the privately owned steel mills because they're more subject to control and direction by the government. Now, the crystal ball, if I polish it up, now if I put aside for the moment issues out of the South China Sea or nuclear salvos from North Korea or further global financial crises out of America, I see four important factors in the future for iron ore. I see the level of domestic production in China as a key factor. I'll come back to in a moment. I see the drive for productivity improvement, which I just referred to. I see the issue of increasing supply from Australia and Brazil and West Africa as the Chinese buy resources and influence in Africa, and the future role of scrap. If I go back to domestic production of ore in China, when I was probably about 2001, 2002, we envisaged that the maximum that the Chinese could produce was about 250 million tonnes of ore, which was about 125 million tonnes of Australian equivalent because of the grade issues. In fact, they produced 600 million tonnes of ore, which was probably about 275 million tonnes of Australian equivalent. The environmental damage they did in mining these very poor ore bodies was massive. In the last couple of years, the Chinese government has closed 1,100 iron ore mines in China. Now, the difference between control from Beijing and what happens in the provinces is a big issue, because no doubt if the steel industry were to spurt again, a lot of those mines would reopen. And I mean, they are crappy mines, and the environmental damage is terrible. Scrap is going to be an important issue. As obsolete scrap, first generation obsolete scrap from high-rise buildings in China starts to become a factor, then I think you'll see an increasing proportion of scrap of steel being produced from mini mills, from electric arc furnaces. The iron ore price has been quite volatile over the last 18 months, doubling in 2016, falling 40% in the period March to May this year, now climbing 25% in July. Price is set in an index basis, so it's more susceptible to volatility. The fundamentals suggest that price should remain in the mid-60s short term and declining to mid-low 50s longer term, primarily due to an increasing supply-demand balance. Don't hold me to any of those figures. It'll all be different. So thank you very much for your time. Questions.
Questions, gentlemen? John.
Chris, there's been for manufacturing using steel, there's been this contamination problem. You can machine up an aircraft landing gear and get, spend thousands and thousands of dollars and have to scrap it because there's silica or some other impurities in it, which has been caused in the main, I think, by recycling of steel. So I'm just wondering, why doesn't Australia, given the automating Kenya's using robotics and all this, set up its own steelworks for high quality steel in Australia.
My guess is it just would not be economic. It would be a lovely thing to do, but it would not be economic. Charles Court's vision was a steel industry in the Pilbara. Great vision. But by the time that looked as if it might be possible, the economics just blew it out of the water. We could not do. You need to have these facilities close to the marketplace, not remote, not long, a big distance away from. But that's why integrated plants, and that's why China went the integrated plant route, because they use virgin units and they produce a better steel. The more scrap you have, unless it's really, really well planned, the more elements you're going to. If you want automotive sheet, you've got to have top class sheet from us.
Well, Japanese cars, for instance, they rusted pretty quick because the impurities in the steel in the bodies.
Not from Hammerstone.
Yes. Graham.
Chris, Rio Tinto is one of the few annual reports I get that actually tell you about what's going on in the company. And I understand why now, because you've got people like you explaining. But the question, I missed the early part of your talk. Who owned Goldsworthy and where did that fit into the picture?
I think Goldsworthy came from a number of Australian and overseas companies. Now, I can't tell you what the consortium is now. Once upon a time I would have known all that, but I'm afraid I've forgotten it all. But they were small, and that deposit was a pretty ordinary deposit, but it was actually the first that exported ore. But that was at the time when Japanese were pretty keen to get in any material.
Yes, is there any interest from India in purchasing Australian ore?
India's quite a big producer in its own right. I don't know that it's got the resources to really underpin a large steel industry, which India will have ultimately. But I think that it'll be a long time before they've got their hands up. For coal's different, but for iron ore, we had 2 deposits in Orissa State in India, for which I was responsible for, and they're quite good deposits. Not quite the quality of Australian material, but not far away. So, and Kudramuk and Goa have been substantial suppliers to the Indian steel industry for years, and exporting.
Chris, I remember at the time I was stunned then too, but 19 months to build that development. The mines, the rail, the port, how was that all managed? Did CRA run that, or did
Yes,
you
they
have
did. It was the CRA engineering arm called Central Engineering Services that did all of that. They did a fantastic job.
They just got contractors in all the way along.
Yes,
It's
they
phenomenal to think.
organised all that. Morrison Knudsen did the railway. All those blokes who laid the railway were Torres Strait Islanders working in massive heat, and it was unbelievable to achieve that.
John.
With all these white-headed gentlemen here dependent on
Well,
dividends.
at least they got here, yeah.
Oh, yes, I've got a little. Tell me this, why don't we get a bigger return on our money?
What
On our dividends.
your dividends? Yes, well, I don't make those decisions anymore, but when you look at capital management and when you look at what's coming in the pipeline, and you need to keep a sufficient amount of capital for that, then these are judgments. And of course, dividend distribution is one thing, and certain parts of the industry like it. Others like you having a war chest ready for the next big thing. So, look, people will be critical all the time, whether it's, and the majors come in for their criticism regularly. So the answer is it's all about capital management, what people think they're going to have to need in the future.
Yes, but you built the house, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, the house has always been expanding.
Yeah, I know the house has to expand, but having built it, you don't have to put that money in again. You've got it there.
Yeah,
So therefore, you're showing your profits on a built house.
yeah, but the whole game is changing all the time.
Yeah,
A loco, I don't know what a loco costs now. Probably costs you 35 million US. And you've got to have you're rolling these locos over all the time. There's 15 mines at Hammersley. They've been depleted at the rate, these mines probably only last 10 years before you've got to replace them and another. So I think they're the issues that people are concerned about. You've got to have the money ready to do those things.
Yeah, well, I've supported Mr. BHP for 40 years. I'm getting a bit sick of it. I'm not going to sell them.
Look, I'll make one comment. My old boss said to me once, he said, I would never have retired if I knew what the bastards were going to pay themselves.
You're talking about bankers, aren't you?
I'm talking about everybody.
Thanks, Chris. It's a very interesting talk. But I'd like you to comment, if you would, on a paper I read not very long ago, and it was talking about China. It was making an assessment of China and the best steel producers in the world. And it referred to the fact that China, about a decade ago, went into Germany, bought one of their largest plants there, and an experimental plant. They bought another one from West Australia, and they shipped the whole lot over to China. One of them took over a year just to dismantle the plant and rebuild, and there's something like 30 tons of documentation. They've used some of those plants for experimenting because they were small plants. They were viable to actually do experimental, and they've now come up with some of the best steel in the world. One of those, it was claimed, is for pipe work. Would you like to comment on any of that, please?
Well, that article was written by a fellow called Mike Komisarov, who used to work for me, so I know him pretty well, and I know none of those plants. But that's what they did. They went and bought plants out of Germany, dismantled them, took them across, rebuilt them, improved on them. I was involved very much in the high smelt process, which was a revolutionary way of creating iron. They bought that plant in Rio Tinto and Australian companies generally don't like waiting 20 years to develop a new technology. They don't have the time to do that. The Chinese do. They bought all of that. They have rebuilt that plant. They've improved on it. And ultimately they'll come up, although Rio maintains the rights to that technology, but they'll make it work. I'm sure they'll make it work. Bit of a tragedy for Australia, to be quite frank. But yes, they have a long-term vision to pick the eyes out of everything. They've killed the aluminium industry. Once upon a time they produced about 3 million tonnes of aluminium metal. They now produce 25 million tonnes or 30 million tonnes. If you want to be an aluminium, don't go there, because the Chinese have got killed.
Yes.
These mines in Western Australia are based on mining hematite, and
not all of them.
Okay, well, I'm coming to that. For these mines, all you have to do is dig it up, crush it up, and ship it out. But there has been
gardening. It's gardening.
Yes, there's been an increasing development of mines where the ore body is magnetite, which has the potential to deliver a higher grade product because of the higher ratio of iron to oxygen and the potential for quite fancy processing, and therefore that iron ore is cheaper to ship and commands a higher price when it gets there. Is that any challenge to these companies?
I was the chairman of Iron Ore Company of Canada, Rio Company. Magnetite, best magnetite in North America, 35% Fe. Costs you a fortune to concentrate it to a level, equivalent level. Costs you a fortune to put it into a form that you can feed it to a blast furnace. You've got to pelletise it, you've got to do it. Massive cost. Could only be done in Canada because of cheap hydro from Quebec. So the magnetite producers in Australia find it very tough, especially with the cost of electrical energy in this country.
Yes.
Find it very, very tough.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're right, very high grade concentrate, but still a huge processing cost. I wouldn't be going anywhere with magnetite.
Thanks, Chris. Is there any estimate of how long the reserves will last at the moment, and are we finding more reserves?
So you're finding more all the time. There's massive province up there. The question will be grade, because the best grade, I mean, Mount Tom Price, Mount Whaleback, terrific stuff, 65% Fe, hematite, the best stuff you could want. But we've been mining these limonites and these other ore bodies, which aren't quite as good, but there's very large quantities of them. Now, I can't tell you because I'm, 15 years out of the business, but, will see me through, probably see you through and your kids through. But there'll be different kind of business.
Yeah.
There'll be, Australian grade is, my day it was 64% F, 63.5% for fines. It's now it dropped somewhat. But
So it does vary, does it? Doesn't find the ores, it varies, the quality varies?
there's the Hammersley, the Rio Tinto operation, 15 mines. They are mined in a way to produce a final chemical and physical specification. So some are high phosphorus is the worst thing you can have because it makes the steel very brittle. Some have too high gangue, silica plus alumina. You put it all together to get a high grade product, but you have to take bits here, bits there, in specific quantities from each. So it's a huge blending, mine planning operation.
Was it like that in the beginning?
Well, you only had Mount Tom Price in the beginning for us, and Whaleback for BHP. So it was much simpler. But even within one ore body, it wasn't all 65% Fe. You had bits here, and see in Whaleback and Mount Tom Price today is not a remnant mining, picking out the best little bits here which are left, and you need all of that to produce a final product.
Chris, you mentioned Brazil.
Yes.
How much bigger are they than Australia? And what do you do to all the big holes in the ground, 860 million tonnes every year going out of the ground?
Well, I'll take that
to the
first.
conservation side?
The rehabilitation of the mines and the way in which we plant, even in my day, was terrific. You can't change the nature, you've got a big hole, but the way in which it's been escarped and graded and things planted is terrific. Brazil, well, they've got massive deposits, Carajás and so forth. The Iron Triangle and Minas Gerais, still very large, but declining. But the new areas in the Orinoco and the Amazon, big areas, amazing.
As long as the dam doesn't flood.
Well, that's another issue, of course, and I must say I feel very sorry for BHP because they're in a 50-50 joint venture at Samarco. All the management's Brazilian, and they're stuck with it. Never had a 50-50 joint venture. You've got no real control.
BHP shareholders, sorry too.
Well, I'm one.
Chris, in this day of cyber attack and hacking up the whole issue, how is the integrity of the Perth Control Centre, which is set up? How has the CRA approached that? Because clearly, if there was a successful hack on those electronic controls, etc., it could be catastrophic for the mine.
Well, I'm not there anymore. I'm long since gone, since 2004, but they are hugely conscious. I know they're hugely, because I've had sufficient conversations with former colleagues to know that you can lose control of your systems very easily. You can have it all extracted. So It'll be continuing battle, this whole cyber area. It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue for government, it's a huge issue for banks, huge issue for major industry. So I'm sure they're grappling with it, that bloody well better be.
Well, gentlemen, I'll now ask Jeff Bransbury. Our sommelier arrived in the nick of time with the bottles of wine.
I kept on watching the door. Chris, that was the most fantastic presentation. Thank you very much for coming. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, don't you? And wonderful history and from this industry. I can imagine Lang Hancock flying over those amazing planes up Hammersley Ranges, dropping bags out to stake his claim. And to think that China only had a miserable little steel industry as recently as 2000.
No, that was 1973.
1973. So it's just a wonderful presentation. And what an interesting career you've had.
Yeah, that was a good company to work for.
You've even got a French name, Mr. Force Majeure.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Very kind. Thank you very much. Thank you.